noticed. And last week, just to give you a brief recap, if you weren't here last week or if you just slept through the sermon last week, I totally understand. And I want to give you a reminder about what took place. So last week we were over in Genesis chapter 16, and we were looking at a young woman by the name of Hagar. And if you remember, we talked about how Hagar tried to run from her pain. And she didn't think that there was probably anybody else around her that would even see her pain. And what had happened was Hagar found herself in a situation where she was another family servant. And that family, which was Abraham and Sarah, couldn't have a child. And so they tried to manipulate things to have a son. And Abraham married his servant, Hagar, and had a child with her. And this made Sarah extremely jealous because she was barren. She couldn't have children. She was jealous. She began to take out all of her frustrations on Hagar. She began to attack and abuse Hagar. Hagar ran. She fled. She was scared. She was in pain because she had been manipulated. She felt abused. She had been through this whole circumstance where she was married off and basically forced to have a child. And now she felt like nobody even cared or even noticed her pain. So she ran, and the real question is, I don't even know if anybody noticed she was gone. But God saw her. God noticed her. And he saw her pain, and he came down to her right there at that spring, and he revealed himself to her. And what we learned from that is as she cried out and she cried through her pain, that sometimes our plea doesn't line up with God's plan. Because God took her and sent her right back to the place where her pain was. Because he said, we're going to deal with this together. If you got anything out of last week's message, that's what I want you to understand is that so many of us sit in a room and feel just unnoticed, even though we're surrounded by people. We don't think people see what we're going through. We don't think people see what our problems are, what our pain is, what our potential is. And we sit there and we just think that they don't notice. But what you do need to notice, what you do need to understand is God notices. God sees you right where you're at. He knows what you're going through. And today we're going to see another guy. We're going to look at a guy that just, look, he's totally unnoticed. Nobody else really notices him, but God does. And this guy, his name is Gideon. In Judges chapter 6, we're going to look at Gideon this morning. So if you have your Bibles, go ahead and turn to Judges chapter 6. We're going to be in verse 11 through 18. So Judges chapter 6, verse 11 through 18 is where we're going to be. And just to let you know a little bit about what's going on, if you back read a little bit in Judges chapter 6, the very first verse in Judges talks about how the Israelites, how they had sinned against the Lord. They had totally sinned against him, and they were far from him. The scripture goes on to tell us that because of this sin, because of the sin that was there, that God sort of took his hand of protection and blessing off of them. He took his hand totally off of them. And all of a sudden, they begin to deal with all of these problems. Their main problem were the Midianites. There was this group of terrorists. I mean, that's what they were. They were terrorists that were terrorizing Israel. And they were coming into their land. They were robbing their people. They were stealing their crops. They were trying to do everything to just totally wipe them out. And Israel is freaking out. Israel is totally freaked out. They're all in hiding, basically. They're trying to hide everything that they can so that these Midianites don't come and attack them. And the problem just continues to get worse and worse. So finally, the Israelites cry out to God. And they're like, God, where are you? Where are you at? Where have you been? And so as they cry out to God, God hears their cry. And he sends a prophet. God sends a prophet. So this prophet comes to Israel and he begins to explain to them, listen, you've basically abandoned God. You're worshiping other gods. And now you're crying out. You don't even realize what's going on in your life. You have these people coming and robbing you and stealing from you, and all of these things are happening, and you don't even understand that you have abandoned God and what He's called you to do and who He's called you to be. Remember what He did for you. That's what the prophet tells them. Remember what He did back in Egypt. How He brought you out of the captivity of the Egyptians. How you crossed the Red Sea. And so this prophet begins to remind them of all of this. But the truth is it doesn't really do any good. They're still sort of stuck in their problems and hiding from it. And then in verse 11, Judges chapter 11, that's where things start to change a little bit. Judges 6:11 says this, "Then the angel of the Lord came and sat under an oak tree that was Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, and his son Gideon was beating out the wheat in the winepress in order to save it from the Midianites." Verse 12 says, "The angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, 'The Lord is with you, O valiant warrior.' Then Gideon said to him, 'Oh, my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then has all of this happened to us? And where are all the miracles which our fathers told us about, saying, did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? Now the Lord has abandoned us, and He's given us into the hands of the Midian.' And the Lord looked at him and said, 'Go in your strength and deliver Israel from the hand of the Midian. Have I not sent you?' He said to him, 'O Lord, how shall I deliver Israel? Behold, my family is the least of Manasseh, and I am the youngest of my father's house.' But the Lord said to him, 'Surely I will be with you, and you shall defeat Midian as one man.' So Gideon said to him, 'If now I have found favor in your sight, then show me a sign. Show me a sign that it is you who speaks with me. Please do not depart from here until I come back, and I bring you my offering, and I lay it before you.' And he said, 'I will remain until you return.'" So just to back up and tell you what happened in those scriptures, basically, the Lord shows up. This is Jesus in the form of God in the flesh, just like He's going to show up. That's what we see right here. It would be referred to just like we did in Genesis chapter 16. This is a Christophany, where Jesus shows up before He showed up in Bethlehem as a baby. He shows up here as the angel of the Lord. And here He has this conversation with Gideon. Gideon, who is in this winepress, hiding from the Midianites. See, he's got this huge problem. And this problem is these people are coming in, they're terrorizing his life, they're terrorizing his family, they're terrorizing his people, they're stealing everything that they can get their hands on. And so he just thinks the best thing for me to do is to hide. I'll just get out of the way, and I'll just hide. And so he gets down in this wine press where he's just feeling worthless and useless and scared, hiding from the Midianites, just hoping that this little bit of grain that he picks up might satisfy them at the table. Isn't it easy in a world that's just full of darkness, isn't it easy to find ourselves feeling worthless? Isn't it easy to feel defeated sometimes with the way that we can be treated, with the things that we go through? Isn't it easy to sit back and believe that nobody even notices what you're going through? Can't you imagine that Gideon's in this wine press, which is important to point out because the wine press is not where you're going to thresh wheat. You're going to have a threshing floor, which would usually be on the top of a hill, out in the middle of everybody so anybody could see. But he couldn't go there because he was scared of the Midianites. And if they saw him, he knew that they would probably attack him, they would probably beat him, they would probably steal his wheat. So he finds a place that he can go hide, that he'll go unnoticed. But I think that when I look at this story, Gideon's dealing with just more than the Midianites. Because Gideon's having to deal with himself. Gideon's have to deal with his family. Gideon's got all kinds of things that he's having to deal with. And that wine press just becomes a place to hide. He goes in there and he gets alone. He doesn't want the Midianites there, definitely, but he probably doesn't want his brothers, his sisters, his dad, anybody else on there. Just let me get in here, let me do what I've got to do, and leave me alone. Have you ever felt that way? Have you ever been there? Where's your hiding place at? I mean, we've all got, I talked to these little kids up here a while ago. They've all got hiding places. You know, we all had hiding places as kids. I thought the coolest thing when I was a kid growing up, in my parents' master bedroom, it was all this dark wood paneling. You know what I'm talking about, like 1960s wood paneling, dark. It used to be here in the sanctuary. I think we can find it other places still. But it was completely from ceiling to floor, this dark paneling. But there was a door cut into that dark paneling that you couldn't see. Unless you looked really, really hard, you couldn't find that door. Because where it was cut out was perfectly hidden sort of in that paneling. And man, that was a really cool hiding place. There was another hiding place that was in that little old house that my parents had. And it was a little compartment that was right by the fireplace. And the fireplace, I don't know what kind of wood that, I don't know what you would call it, but it was boxed in, and the fireplace sort of set on a little pedestal. And around it, where it was boxed in, it had these panels. And one of the panels just pulled out. And that would be the perfect hiding place if somebody was looking for you. Except there wouldn't be an escape. But all right. We've all sort of got hiding places. I mean, the truth is, my favorite hiding place is my office right here. That's my favorite hiding place is that office. And usually when I'm there for hiding purposes, and what I mean is I'm trying to withdraw, and usually I'm withdrawing from my family. I'm withdrawing from people. I'm just trying to withdraw and lock myself in that room. You know, I hide in there. Most of the time people leave me alone. I found me a good hiding place. Most of the time people realize, oh, his door's shut. He's in there praying and preparing. I'm just trying to hide for a little bit. You know, I'm just trying to get away. And that's the dead honest truth. Because just like you, I deal with things too in my life. And sometimes it's like, I don't want to talk about them. I don't want to deal with them. I'm just going to go into my office and just sit there and hope that nobody bothers me. You've been there, right? I believe that's where Gideon was. And so when we look at this story about Gideon, I want to ask ourselves some questions today. I want you to ask yourself some questions as we evaluate our faith walk and where we're at. And the first question is this: what is it that you're hiding from? What are you hiding from? I mean, that's a legitimate question. Because I believe that when we look at this, it's obvious in verse 11 that Gideon was hiding from his enemy. It says, Gideon was beating out wheat in the winepress in order to save it from the Midianites. He was hiding from them. But I believe that everything even went deeper with Gideon. When you begin to really get in this story and you begin to look at his personality and you start to understand the fears that he was dealing with, the things that were deep inside of Gideon that he didn't want to deal with, you start to realize that, you know what? It was more than just the Midianites. It was a lot more. That he was just escaping. And the winepress was his office. You know? Because we all have that place. I mean, we all think it's easier to go and hide. But it's not. We have to deal with our problems. We can't ignore our enemies. We can't ignore the attacks. We can't ignore the problems. I mean, we can temporarily, but the truth is it's not going to solve anything. At some point, you've got to come out of hiding and you've got to face it. One of the things that I hide from, and I don't know why, I have this fear of the doctor. And I know you laugh and you probably think, that's just a man thing. No, it's really not. Mick's not in here for me to pick on him, but Mick's really not afraid of the doctor. Or he doesn't come across to me that he is. You know, he's like, oh, I'll make my visits. And he talks about his nurse practitioner like they're best friends. And I got to go and give me some new meds today. And I'm just like, dude, how do you do that? I am scared to death, literally, of the doctor. Because if I don't go, I'm going to die. Because the doctor's got some good advice for me. But that is something, that's a fear that I deal with. And the way that I hide from it, is I try to ignore it. I try to ignore the signals telling me, hey, it's probably time you go to the doctor and get checked out. That's not feeling right. I ignore the pain. Yeah, you know, you shouldn't quite have that pain there, Craig. That doesn't feel good. I ignore my wife. Craig, you need to go to the doctor. I got sick a few months ago, and she finally said, okay, we're going to the doctor. I said, yes, ma'am. So we loaded up in the car, and I think she was afraid I was going to try to escape, right? We loaded up in the car, went down to Canton, got in the doctor's office, and I'm sitting in there, right? And she knows me so well. I'm sitting in that doctor's office. She probably sees my fear, my anxiety, right? And she says, I'm going in there with you. And I'm like, what? Yeah, I'm going to go in there with you. I said, listen, I'm not 12. You don't need to go in there with me. I'm perfectly fine to go in there by myself. I think she was afraid I was going to sneak out the back door and I just walk in there, keep right on going. She says, no, I'm going in there with you. We're going to tell them what's going on. My hiding place for that was just to try to ignore what was going on in my life. I figured out of sight, out of mind. That it's just not going to affect me. And so we try to ignore our problems. I mean, you're doing it right now. You sit in church. For some of you, this is your hiding place. Some of you, it is. You hide here. The real stuff doesn't come out. The real problems don't. The marriage issues, the issues with your kids, the issues with your finances, they don't come out. You hide here, you try to feel better about yourself, and you think that if you ignore those issues long enough, maybe they'll just disappear. Maybe if you just don't address them, they'll just go away. But they don't. The Midianites keep coming back, and they just keep stealing from you. And they take more, and they take more, and they take more. And so the longer you sit there and you ignore the problems, the more the enemy is going to come and steal, kill, and destroy. The more Satan is going to take from you. And what he's robbing from you right now is your joy. That's right. What he's taking from you right now is your joy, because you want to ignore the problem. You want to go to your hiding place. For some of you, it's home. I just stay home. I'm going to stay out of everything else. I'm going to hide here. For some of you, it's work. Yeah, it is work. Now, I know that the oil field does a great job, but some of you run off to the oil field because you try to escape things. Because that's your hiding place. You run off to work. You run off to home. You run off to your office. You run off to school. Some of you are trying to hide from school. I read an article not too long ago that was reminding parents, when a child says, my stomach hurts, most likely they're dealing with anxiety. And I thought about that, and I said, what does that mean? And I began to think about my little brother. My little brother that most of you know passed away in December. And he dealt with some of his own problems and issues all throughout his life. One of the things that I don't think we ever realized probably until he got older and we sort of saw his paranoia and the anxiety that he dealt with, was he was dealing with anxiety when he was like 11, 12, 13 years old. And he would call my mom from school talking about how upset his stomach was. And at 11, 12, 13 years old, he was taking Tums and Rolaids and antacids to school. Not because he liked the flavor, but because he was legitimately getting upset because he didn't want to be there. Because of the anxiety and the fear that was there. Parents, what you need to realize is sometimes your kids, they're hiding in their rooms, and they're hiding in their cars, and they're hiding in other places. And the reason is because they don't want to deal with their problems. And they think that maybe they'll just go away if we hide from them. And where did they learn it? They learned it from you. They learned it from me. They learned it from us. As they watch us deal with our problems, and they watch us just push them under the bed as we hide them, because we all do. We all hide. We all hide. Whether it be home, work, school, we all hide. It can be in the office, it can be in your shop, it can be in your car, it can be in your room, you hide. And we just tell ourselves it would be easier to hide and suppress and pretend like there's no problems at all. So we ask our question is, so what is it that we are hiding from? Most of the time it's just hiding from our fear. And some of you are just afraid. So why do we hide? Why not deal with the problem? Why do we hide? The question in verse 15, as the Lord shows up in this miraculous way to Gideon. And there is Gideon hiding in this wine press, bouncing on this wheat. Probably every step he's taking, everything that he's doing, he's probably not even doing it right, because he's just in there probably kicking out his frustrations. He's probably losing more wheat than he's actually getting. And he's in there and he's just hiding, and God just shows up in all of his grace and just says, hey, Gideon, what's going on? Man, you don't look right, man. This isn't right, Gideon. In verse 15, and he said to him, O Lord, how shall I deliver Israel? God came to him and said, I found you in this wine press, and I want you to know, Gideon, I want you to know something really important. I've got a big job for you. Though you're fearful, though you're scared, though you're hiding, I see something bigger. I see something greater in you, Gideon. And you're going to go defeat this enemy. You're going to overcome this. And Gideon's like, Lord, how's this going to happen? He says, behold, my family is the least in Manasseh, and I am the youngest of my father's house. And when I look at that, what I see is my family is pretty much rejected by everybody around us. And on top of that, I'm pretty much the reject of my family. That's what I'm dealing with, God. I'm not just dealing with Midianite problems, I'm dealing with family problems. And if you really want to know the kind of family problems that Gideon's dealing with, his family were one of the ones that had abandoned God and were worshiping Baal. It's very possible that Gideon had tried to stand up for God. Maybe that's what God saw in him. Maybe God saw in Gideon saying, guys, this isn't right. We should not worship the gods of these foreign lands. And Gideon's dad just slapped him in the back of the head and said, shut up, boy. You don't know what you're talking about. I'm dad. You listen to me. And Gideon saw it and he understood it. He's in that wine press and he's trying to just get his frustration out. Man, this is awful. And God shows up and says, oh, you valiant warrior. Oh, you great warrior of God. And Gideon's like, what? Who are you talking about? Who are you looking at? Do you know who I am? I mean, Gideon is there. He's afraid. He's unsure of himself. His faith is shaken, and his enemy is evil. And he's like, God, who are you talking to? How many of you can identify with that right there? That at some point in your life, You have been shaken. Your faith has been shaken. You feel unworthy, like you can't do anything. You feel like the world is crashing in around you and nobody else notices. But today I'm telling you, God looks and He sees a mighty warrior inside of you. Amen. He looks and He sees something greater. God doesn't look according to your past. God doesn't even look at your present. God looks at your potential. He looks at when you will surrender, your surrendered potential. When you will finally say one day, you know what, God? You're right. I surrender. Not to my enemy, not to my fear. I don't surrender to myself, but God, I surrender to you. When I was in Waxahachie, I had this guy in my church. His name was Cliff Burnett. Cliff was an awesome, awesome guy. He was a widower, and I never knew his wife, but he loved her to death. But he picked up a hobby sort of in his retirement years. And one day, Cliff invited me and Grant over to sort of see what his hobby was. And Cliff takes us out. He lives on this little ranch outside Waxahachie and had him a really nice little home. He had these big, giant, huge metal shops. And he goes and he takes me and Grant in those shops, and he had these old cars that he had restored. I'm talking, there was like 4 or 5 of them in this shop, and he had another shop that had like 3 that were in waiting. This guy loved to restore old cars. What he did is he took things that people considered useless. He took things that people considered worthless. He took what people considered trash and that they threw out, and he grabbed a hold of them and he transformed them into something great and into something beautiful and into something that everybody looks at and admires. And let me tell you, that's what God was looking at when He saw Gideon. He says, yeah, you are the least in Manasseh. You are the least in your family, but I don't see the least. I see the most. What I see in you is greatness. You just let me get my hands on you, Gideon. You let me transform you into what I can make, and you are going to be something special. And that's what God's saying to you right now. If you'll just give me a chance, if you will give me a chance and surrender to me, you can be something special. That's right. But you've got to give it up. You've got to give all the fear and anxiety and hand it all over to God and say, okay, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to surrender to you, God, because you are the one that transforms nothing into something. In 1 John chapter 3:20, it says, God is greater than our heart, and He knows all things. And what that scripture is saying is, God is greater than your doubt. God is greater than your fear. God is greater than those feelings of worthlessness, those feelings that you can't do it. God is greater than all those voices that tell you that, because God sees greatness in you. You've just got to allow Him to pull it out. So the question is, why do you hide? We hide because of those feelings. They trap us. And we hide. We don't want to deal with them. But the truth is we have to. And the only way to deal with those problems is surrender. So what will it take? That's the question. The question is, what will it take? What's it going to take for you to overcome your hiding? What's it going to take for you to finally step out and say, I'm done. It's over. I'm not hiding anymore. I'm going to face my fear. I'm going to face my anxiety. I'm going to go to the doctor. What's it going to take? Because for Gideon, in verse 16, he said, but the Lord said to him, surely I will be with you, and you shall defeat Midian as one man. God says, what you need to understand, Gideon, is you're not going into this by yourself. You don't have to worry about being alone. You don't have to worry about facing the Midians all alone, because I am going to be with you. And what God is telling you today, whatever your problem is, whether it's a marriage problem, a financial problem, whether it's a children problem, whether it's a work problem or an addiction problem, no matter what your problem is, if it's a people problem, whatever your problem is, God is saying, I am greater. God said, I'm greater than whatever it is that you face. And I can pull you out of this, and we can go at it together. Amen. We are going to fight this together. So if you know that story, what happens after that? Listen, Gideon's faith was shaken. If anything, remember, where we ended up is Gideon asked the Lord, he said, wait right here, I got to go get something. And Gideon goes and he gets an offering to lay before the Lord. And you think that that sounds good, but that wasn't it. He gets an offering so that God can prove that he is God. See, God hadn't done enough for Gideon yet. And so he wanted some proof that, okay, you can really do this. And so the Bible tells us that the Lord, with his staff, reached down and consumed that offering with fire. And it just was consumed right there in front of Gideon. And Gideon's like, what? Okay, I can do this. What am I doing, God? And God said, you know what? You need to go, and you need to tear down the altars of Baal. And he says, but wait a second. If I go do that, they're going to kill me. And he says, you're not going to die, Gideon. I'm with you. Go tear them down. So Gideon goes. He tears down the altars of Baal at night, by the way, because he was still scared. And that's what the Bible tells us. Because this is a process. I understand today you are dealing with some stuff. And there are steps. And this was Gideon's first. And he was still scared. He went at night because he didn't want them to see him. But they found out anyway they were going to kill him. His dad steps up, and his dad's sort of the one that saves him. And says, you know what? If this Baal is a real God, y'all don't need to kill my son. Let him contend for himself. Let Baal take my son out. Let that happen. And they're like, yeah, that's a good idea. And Baal didn't show up. Because why? Because the presence of the Almighty God was on Gideon. He ain't coming. And so all of a sudden Gideon's like, okay, I've got a little confidence. I'm going to do this. And the next thing we know that the Lord comes to him and says, okay, now that was just practice, the Baal altar thing. You need to go down and wipe out those Midianites. Let's take care of this problem once and for good. And Gideon says, I'm not too sure about this, God. I mean, I know I saw you consume that food with fire, and I know you helped me out here as I tore down the altar of Baal, but I'm really not sure that this is going to work out for me either. Why don't you do me a favor? I'm going to take this fleece. I'm going to lay it out. And as I lay out this fleece at night, I want to come back in the morning and see that that fleece is wet, but there is no dew on the ground. So God, that's your big test. Let me test you. God says, okay. Next morning he wakes up, there's the fleece wet on the ground. No other dew. Gideon says, oh, that's pretty good, God, but that's not good enough. Let's do this one more time, except let's do it the opposite. I'm going to lay that same fleece out. I'll dry it out all day, wring it out, lay it out on the ground. It'll be nice and crispy. But this time, I want the fleece to be dry and the ground to be wet. God said, okay. Comes back the next morning and, So God, you're really serious about this thing. You really want me to go to fight Midian? Yeah. Now go get your men together and go. And so Gideon goes and he gathers up 22,000 warriors. God looks at him and says, that's too much. Gideon says, what? Yeah, that's too much. All the ones that are really afraid and don't want to fight, go tell them that they can leave and go home. So Gideon's like, okay. Guys, if you want to just leave and go home, you don't want to be in this fight, it's okay. Boom, 12,000 get up and leave. Now there's 10,000 left. And Gideon's like, okay, we can probably still do this with 10,000, right? And God says, no, that's too many. I want you to take them down to the river. Give them all a drink. And the ones that kneel down and bend over and drink like a dog, just kick them out of the group. We're not taking them. Nobody should drink like a dog. The ones that don't drink like a dog and that drink like gentlemen and reach down and scoop it up with their hand to their mouth, those are the civilized ones. We're going to take them, God said. And so Gideon's like, okay, that's strange, but okay, God, let's go take them down to the river. And only 300 civilized men were in Israel. 9,700 hit the road because they drank like dogs. And now Gideon's got his 300 men, and God says, okay, now it's time, Gideon, you ready? And Gideon's going, man, I guess I am. He said, here's the plan. You take them down there, you split into 3 groups. You take you a horn, you take you a pitcher, and you take you a torch. And you go down there. And the Bible tells us that they went down there and they conquered the Midianites with 3 men, a torch, a pitcher, and a horn. And if you want to know how they did it, you need to go read. But they conquered. And no matter what you've got going on today, God can conquer. God can conquer. Because see, many of you right now, you're hiding. You're in your hiding places. And you don't know what to do. You're scared. And you're like, hey, I need to break free. I need to get out of this. But I don't really know what to do. How do I come out of hiding? What do I do? Where do I go from here? What am I going to do? My question for you right now as we get ready to close. How many of you in this room right now are hiding from something? How many of you in this room right now wake up every day consumed with fear about something? Consumed with that you're not worth it? Consumed that you can't deal with it? You're consumed. How many of you in this room are like me? You've got something that you're hiding from. Raise your hand. Raise your hand. Start to look around a little bit. Don't be afraid. I'm telling you, we've all got hiding places. We've all got hiding places. We call it our office. We call it our bedroom. And we just want to hide. But I'm telling you today, if you're ready to solve it, if you're ready to face that problem head on, God is here and He's made you some promises. He's made you some promises that He says in Psalm chapter 37, delight yourself in the Lord and He will give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust in Him and He will do it. He will bring forth your righteousness as the light and your judgment as the noonday. God is saying, if you trust me, we're going to do this together. I can do this. I can handle this. In 1 Timothy chapter 15, Paul says this, it is a trustworthy statement, deserving full acceptance, that Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners, among whom I am foremost of all. Do you sit there like Gideon today and say, you know what, I really need proof. I need a wet fleece, or I need fire to come down. I need proof. Well, the proof was on the cross. That's what Paul was saying. The proof was on the cross. You shouldn't need any more proof than that. 1 John chapter 4 says this in verse 4, you are from God. Little children, you have overcome them, because greater is He that is in you than he that is in the world. Everybody right now with me say, greater is He. Greater is He. Do you believe that? Greater is He. Say it one more time. Greater is He. If you believe that and you really, really want to be set free today, you really want to come out of hiding, then you're going to have to come out of the wine press. It means you're going to have to step out on faith. I've asked them to come and sing a song today because I believe that some of you have problems that you need to deal with. You may not even need me to pray about them, but I'm more than happy to do that. But you have things that you need to just lay down before God, and you just need to say, hey, I'm surrendering because you see potential in me that nobody else has even noticed. I'm surrendering to you. Here are my problems. So right now, if that is you, because you raised your hand a while ago, and you are actually ready to surrender, I'm going to open up the altar.